Now, let us think about case 2. When property right is given to the polluter. Okay. If property right is given to the polluter, what will happen? Let me draw the diagram once again. Okay. This is dollar, this is the same name I am going to use, AOCD, this is C, this is D, then we will use. Okay. Now, when the property right is given to the polluter in the pre-negotiation situation, let us say in the pre-negotiation situation, this is pre-negotiation. What is the level of pollution? Property right is given to the polluter. Obviously, level of pollution in that case would be 0, because polluter won't allow the polluter to pollute. If level of pollution is 0, what is the benefit to the polluter? Is also 0. What is the cost to the polluter? Sorry, since there is no pollution here, what is the benefit to the polluter? Can you think of? Benefit to the polluter is also 0. Do you know why? Because we assume that the utility function, utility is a function of two commodities. One is X, which is marketable goods and services, Q is the environment quality. In this case, even though environmental quality is very high, because Q is very high, Q is very low, there is no pollution, since pollution is 0, Q is very high, utility is still 0 because X is also 0. 0 pollution means 0 production of goods and services. That is why benefit to the polluter is also 0. So, we need not only goods and services, we need not only environmental quality, at the same time we also need goods and services. So, there is null jointness between X and Q. If you want to reduce Q pollution to be 0, then X will also go down to 0. That is why the utility will also become 0. Okay. So, that is the reason when pollution goes down to 0, benefit to the polluter is also 0, social welfare equals to also 0, there is no production of goods and services. Now, suppose in the post negotiation period, the polluter is compensating the polluter for pollution making. So, polluter will demand compensation, and what should be the optimum level of compensation? If the polluter is allowing the polluter to pollute, so obviously for the first unit polluter would need this much amount of compensation, and polluter is also happy to give that much compensation because his marginal benefit at this level of pollution is much higher than the compensation. So, pollutee will receive compensation based on marginal cost of pollution control, very simple. So, pollutee is saying yes, I will allow you to pollute if you compensate for my cost of pollution control, and cost of pollution control is decided by this curve, this upward sloping MC curve. So, polluter is going to compensate along this curve. So, what should be the optimum level of compensation? Again the same amount which was earlier BQ. So, this is again B and this is Q. So, BQ is optimum compensation. Compensation given to the pollutee. Optimum compensation, okay, given to the pollutee. So, what would be the level of pollution then? Level of pollution is equals to AQ. What is the benefit to the polluter? So, what should be the benefit to the polluter if the polluter pollutes up to this much? Okay, can you think of? So, total benefit would be the area A, Q, B, D. This is the revenue generated from production, but out of this total benefit some part will go to the pollutee because polluter has to compensate. What is the total compensation? This is the compensation, let us say B P minus the area A Q B P, that is the polluter's benefit. Okay. This part, this triangle is the compensation polluter is giving to the pollutee. That is why the net benefit in the post negotiation period is AQBD minus AQBP. Okay. What is happening to the benefit to the pollutee? Benefit to the pollutee is gaining. So, what is the compensation? Is getting A, Q, B, P. So, this amount which is cost to the polluter is now benefit to the pollutee, but out of which pollutee has to spend some money for pollution control, and this is the area. So, minus the triangle A, Q, B. So, that means there is a net gain to the pollutee also. Okay. And what is the net gain? This is the net gain. See, this area is a net gain to the pollutee, and this is the area which is net gain to the polluter. Okay. All right. So, that means once again in this case also we see that post negotiation period both the polluter and the polluter is better off compared to the pre-negotiation period. So, that means their costless bargaining is again leading to efficient level of pollution. Why this is efficient level of pollution AQ? Because AQ is called efficient level of pollution because both the polluter and the pollutee is better off, social welfare is also gaining compared to the pre-negotiation period. So, this is so fantastic. Okay? This is so fantastic what Ronald Coase said. So, that means we can solve this externality problem just by assigning property right and giving it either to the pollutee and the polluter and ask them to bargain. Now, the question is, do you think that Coase theorem undermine the role of government? This is the question. Do you think Coase theorem undermines the role of government? This is the question I am asking. Apparently, it may look like yes, Coase theorem is actually undermining the government's role, but this is not true, because what Coase theorem assume that property right should be defined and it should be given either to the polluter and the pollutee, and we should facilitate them bargaining costlessly. There should not be any cost. Now, who will allocate property right? It is the government. Government will allocate property right. Government will define and distribute property right. How? By enforcing law and order. And government will also facilitate the bargaining. Now, economists, they criticize this Coasean framework because they said you assume the world is costless. That means the world is transaction cost free, but in reality the world is actually not transaction cost free. Rather, so much of transaction cost is involved in this bargaining process. In reality, there are n number of polluters and there are so many pollutees. Do you think as an individual pollutee it is easy for me to identify I am suffering for which particular polluter's pollution? Similarly, even though the polluter wants to compensate, it is very difficult for the polluter to identify the pollutee as well. Then Coase said, yes, you are correct. Since my theorem assumed the world is construction cost free, and if that type of world can actually lead to efficient solution, that means if we relax this assumption and reverse the story, that means we say since the world is full of transaction cost, government has to intervene. So, in a way Coase theorem was actually trying to establish the role of transaction cost in economics, for which he received Nobel Prize also. This transaction cost can actually help explaining why the firm exists. What is firm basically? Firm is nothing but an organization under which many people they work. Okay? Instead of people working on their own for collecting resources, production and selling it to the market, they are working under the umbrella of a bigger organization, because there is huge transaction cost. If each of these individual participants they try to identify the resource and they try to identify potential seller. I produce something today by collecting labor, capital, material, so on and so forth. and then I sell it. Tomorrow morning when I start my day, I am not sure whether I will get somebody to work for me, whether I will get a buyer who will buy my products, so on and so forth. So, it will involve a huge transaction for me if I try to produce on my own. At the same time, there is a huge transaction cost involved for the buyer as well. Okay. So, the buyer also does not know. Today they got a seller who produced, tomorrow morning they do not know. As a laborer, I do not know whether tomorrow morning I will get some employment or not. So, both the people, sellers, that means all of us who, the laborers who have capital, we give everything to the firm and then we work under the umbrella of an organization to remove this sort of uncertainty. Okay. So, Coase theorem does not undermine the role of government, rather it emphasizes the role of government to assign property right and to facilitate negotiation, because the world is full of transaction cost. Okay. The world is full of transaction cost. All right. So far what we have discussed then, that government intervention directly or indirectly is required to correct market failure in presence of externality. Okay. And what was the solution? Solution was basically given by Ronald Coase. He suggested a framework assuming world is transaction cost free and polluter and the polluter can easily bargain among themselves and come up to an efficient level of pollution. Now, the second approach of correcting this pollution is emission tax. Emission tax, or this tax is known as Pigouvian tax. Why this is Pigouvian tax? Because the famous British economist Pigou first came up with the idea of emission tax. He said, when the firm is generating pollution, we must impose a tax on his or her production. How does it work? We will try to understand the mechanism of this emission tax by using again a simple diagram. Let us say that in the x axis we are measuring output and here again dollar, because you can measure price, cost, anything. So, this is let us say the marginal benefit curve, marginal benefit of production or marginal benefit of pollution, whatever you may think about, and let us say this is the marginal cost of supply and this is the optimum level of output. So, mathematically if we write the production function for this firm, then what is happening? Profit equals to P into Q, which is total revenue, minus total cost, which is a function of output. Okay. So, what is required for profit maximization? Del P or del phi del Q equals to 0, which will give you P minus MC equals to 0. So, that means P equals to MC and this is giving you Q star, let us say. But look here, what is happening? In the optimization process or profit maximizing process, the firm is considering only total cost of production. the firm is not at all considering the cost of pollution that it is generating. Okay. The production of output Q also results in some amount of pollution, for which there is a cost which is called damage cost, because people will suffer from bad health due to pollution. But the polluter or the firm is not at all thinking about this. Then the question is, how does the policymaker motivate the firm to internalize the externality? Okay. How to motivate the firm to internalize externality? Okay. We all know rational people respond to incentives. Incentive can be reward or punishment. Okay. Incentive can be reward or punishment. So, let us assume that policymaker did something for which the firm is now considering the damage cost of the pollution. How it is happening? Let us assume that beta, let us assume beta is the pollution generating coefficient. So, total pollution alpha then equals to B into Q. So, we are assuming a linear pollution generating function or emission function. This is linear emission function. Let us also assume that there is a monetary cost to this emission, which is denoted by d alpha, damage cost to the society. Cost to the society for pollution. So, if the firm incorporates this damage function into the profit function, then the revised profit function would be, what would be the revised profit function? Revised profit function would be the following. So, that means pi equals to then P into Q minus total cost C is a function of Q minus d alpha. Substituting beta Q for alpha, then P into Q minus C into Q, C function Q minus d into beta Q. Okay. So, now profit maximizing condition is del phi del Q equals to 0, which implies P minus C prime Q minus beta d prime Q equals to 0. So, that means P equals to C prime Q plus beta d prime Q. Right. So, what is happening if you compare the pre and post? Earlier P equals to MC. What is C prime Q? This is nothing but MC only. But when the firm considers the externality into the profit function, this new term is added, beta D prime Q. What is that? This is basically marginal damage cost, which is also known as marginal social cost. Okay. So, price should not only be equals to marginal cost of production plus something should be added because the firm is polluting, and that addition is beta D prime Q, which is marginal damage cost. Okay. Now, the question is how the policymaker will motivate the firm to consider the social cost. Firm is not going to do that voluntarily, because firm is a profit making entity. Its only objective is to make profit. So, policymaker is now imposing the Pigouvian tax. Okay. Now, policymaker is imposing Pigouvian tax. Pigouvian tax is imposed. Per unit of output. So, if that is the case, then profit function will look like P into Q minus C into Q, C function Q minus T into Q. This T is the tax rate, which is called emission tax imposed on output. Then what will happen? Del pi del Q equals to 0 implies P equals to C prime Q plus the tax rate. Okay. Now, let me call this equation as 2, let me call this equation as 1. Comparing 1 and 2, what we can say that T should be equals to beta D prime Q. So, this is the mechanism. So, if a tax is imposed on the firm which is equals to marginal social cost, then the firm will try to internalize the externality and will arrive at efficient level of pollution. So, that means here this is only the marginal private cost denoted by P. When the tax is imposed by the amount marginal social cost, so this curve will shift upward. So, this is basically marginal private cost plus MCP plus MC social. Okay. What is MC curve? If you recall, in one of our previous discussion, we said that upward sloping MC curve is actually the supply curve of the firm, because that indicates what is the minimum price that the supplier wants to receive. MC curve is also known as supply curve. Earlier this was the supply, there was overproduction. That means there was over pollution. Amount of pollution what was generated out of Q star was more than what is socially desirable. So, that means after imposition of tax, this cost will go up and then the firm will produce only Q double star. So, there would be a reduction, there would be a shift in supply. Okay. This is how a Pigouvian tax can motivate the firm to internalize the externality. Tax should be imposed, and what should be the amount of tax? T equals to beta d prime q. However, we must also keep in mind that if correcting negative externality or pollution was so simple, society would have solved all the environmental problems by now. So, that means even though Pigouvian tax looks very simple, it is very difficult to implement. Before we talk about the implementation problem, is there any similarity between the framework of Pigouvian tax and the Gaussian bargaining? So, what is the comparison between, so this is Gauss versus Pigou. So, Gauss also said that there must be property right, well defined property right. See, in the Pigouvian tax also, we are saying tax is imposed on the polluter. That means indirectly government is giving a property right to actually the pollutee to enjoy clean environment. That is the similarity between Gauss theorem and Pigouvian tax principle. And polluter is asked to pay. That is why Pigouvian tax is also known as polluters pay principle. This is the similarity. But there are problems in implementing this rule. Okay, problems are there in implementing this Pigouvian taxation. What are those? First of all, identifying the people who are actually getting affected by this pollution is very difficult. Pollution travels through air, water, so on and so forth. So, who is getting affected for what type of pollutant or pollution? It is very difficult. Even though it is identified, then it is very difficult to come up with a function dq. What we have assumed, look at this d function, damage cost. We assumed a monetary value, but do you think in reality assigning a monetary value for all sorts of damage is that easy? Pollution may impact you not immediately, but after 10 years. So, what would be the damage then? Because of all these, Pigouvian taxation, even though it looks very simple, it is very difficult to implement, okay, in reality. That is why society is still struggling with different sorts of market based instruments. Pigouvian tax is known as one of the market based instruments for pollution control or to correct for externality, right. There are other forms of market based instrument. So, this entire thing tells you that when there is negative externality, government intervention is required in the form of taxation, because there is a tendency to oversupply, overproduction. Opposite thing happen in case of positive externality. Suppose somebody wants to go for clean fuel, okay, So, utilization of clean fuel not only helps that particular individual, but the entire society gets the benefit, because clean fuel will generate less pollution, environment would be clean. But the individual will only think about his or her own benefit. This is clean fuel. So, deciding about this optimum Q star, so only marginal benefit for the private and marginal cost also for the private player would be considered. If I am thinking whether to adopt clean fuel or not, I will be thinking what is my benefit marginal, what is my marginal cost. I will not think anything about the benefit that goes to the society. So, that means marginal benefit will appear to be much lower, since I am considering only my own benefit. Obviously, if marginal benefit appears to be much lower, the individual level of clean fuel adoption would be much lower than what the society wants. So, that means this Q star would be much lower than the socially desirable level. So, what should the government do? Government now gives subsidy to this individual in the form of reducing the price of it. So, when there is positive externality, government needs to give subsidy to increase the supply. That means increase the adoption of clean fuel. Otherwise, there would be under adoption, just the opposite of negative externality. Same thing for vaccination. If no subsidy is given for vaccine, do you think all of us will go for it? No, because we will be thinking what is the price of it, what is the benefit for me. Comparing marginal benefit and marginal cost will result in very few people going for vaccination. So, positive externality requires subsidy, negative externality requires taxation. Both these things together actually describes the situation of market externality, that is one context under which competitive market also fails. If you recall, we have discussed one more context for market failure, that was the situation of market power. Market is imperfectly competitive. What happens there, that we will discuss in our next sessions when we will be talking about market structure. With this, we are closing our discussion today. Thank you.